Section 39 of After Dark. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. After Dark by Wilkie Collins. The Professor's Story of the Yellow Mask. Part Second, Chapter 1. Even the masterstroke of replacing the treacherous Italian forewoman by a French dressmaker, engaged direct from Paris, did not at first avail to elevate the great Grifoni establishment above the reach of minor calamities. Mademoiselle Virginie had not occupied her new situation at Pisa quite a week before she fell ill. All sorts of reports were circulated as to the cause of this illness, and the Demoiselle Grifoni even went so far as to suggest the health of the new forewoman had fallen a sacrifice to some nefarious practices of the chemical sort on the part of her rival in the trade. But, however the misfortune had been produced, it was a fact that Mademoiselle Virginie was certainly very ill, and another fact that the doctor insisted on her being sent to the baths at Lucca as soon as she could be moved from her bed. Fortunately for the Demoiselle Grifoni, the Frenchwoman had succeeded in producing 3 specimens of her art before her health broke down. They comprised the evening dress of yellow brocaded silk, to which she had devoted herself on the morning when she first assumed her duties at Pisa, a black cloak and hood of an entirely new shape, and an irresistibly fascinating dressing gown, said to have been first brought into fashion by the princesses of the royal blood of France. These articles of costume, on being exhibited in the showroom, electrified the ladies of Pisa, and orders from all sides flowed in immediately on the Grifoni establishment. They were, of course, easily executed by the inferior workwomen, from the specimen dresses of the French dressmaker, so that the illness of Mademoiselle Virginie, though it might cause her mistress some temporary inconvenience, was, after all, productive of no absolute loss. 2 months at the baths of Lucca restored the new forewoman to health. She returned to Pisa and resumed her place in the private workroom. Once re-established there, she discovered that an important change had taken place during her absence. Her friend and assistant, Brigida, had resigned her situation. All inquiries made of the Demoiselle Grifoni only elicited one answer. The missing workwoman had abruptly left her place at 5 minutes' warning, and had departed without confiding to any one what she thought of doing, or whither she intended to turn her steps. Months elapsed. The new year came, but no explanatory letter arrived from Brigida. The spring season passed off, with all its accompaniments of dressmaking and dress buying, but still there was no news of her. The first anniversary of Mademoiselle Virginie's engagement with the Demoiselle Grifoni came round, and then at last a note arrived, stating that Brigida had returned to Pisa, and that if the French forewoman would send an answer, mentioning where her private lodgings were, she would visit her old friend that evening after business hours. The information was gladly enough given, and punctually to the appointed time Brigida arrived at Mademoiselle Virginie's little sitting-room. Advancing with her usual indolent stateliness of gait, the Italian asked after her friend's health as coolly, and sat down in the nearest chair as carelessly, as if they had not been separated for more than a few days. Mademoiselle Virginie laughed in her liveliest manner, and raised her mobile French eyebrows in sprightly astonishment. "Well, Brigida," she exclaimed, "they certainly did you no injustice when they nicknamed you Care for Nothing in old Grifoni's workroom. Where have you been? Why have you never written to me?" "I had nothing particular to write about, and besides I always intended to come back to Pisa and see you," answered Brigida, leaning back luxuriously in her chair. "But where have you been for nearly a whole year past? In Italy?" "No, at Paris. You know I can sing. Not very well, but I have a voice, and most Frenchwomen, excuse the impertinence, have none. I met with a friend, and got introduced to a manager, and I have been singing at the theatre. Not the great parts, only the second. Your amiable countrywomen could not screech me down on the stage, but they intrigued against me successfully behind the scenes. In short, I quarrelled with our principal lady, quarrelled with the manager, quarrelled with my friend, and here I am back at Pisa, with a little money saved in my pocket, and no great notion what I am to do next." "Back at Pisa? Why did you leave it?" Brigida's eyes began to lose their indolent expression. She sat up suddenly in her chair, and set one of her hands heavily on a little table by her side. "Why?" she repeated. "Because when I find the game going against me, I prefer giving it up at once to waiting to be beaten." "Ah! You refer to that last year's project of yours for making your fortune among the sculptors. I should like to hear how it was you failed with the wealthy young amateur. Remember that I fell ill before you had any news to give me. Your absence when I returned from Lucca, and almost immediately afterwards the marriage of your intended conquest to the sculptor's daughter, proved to me, of course, that you must have failed. But I never heard how. I know nothing at this moment but the bare fact that Maddalena Lomi won the prize. Tell me first, do she and her husband live together happily? There are no stories of their disagreeing. She has dresses, horses, carriages, a negro page, the smallest lap dog in Italy. In short, all the luxuries that a woman can want, and a child, by the by, into the bargain." "A child?" "Yes, a child, born little more than a week ago." "Not a boy, I hope?" "No, a girl." "I am glad of that. Those rich people always want the first-born to be an heir. They will both be disappointed. I am glad of that." "Mercy on us, Brigida, how fierce you look!" "Do I? It's likely enough. I hate Fabio d'Ascoli and Maddalena Lomi, singly as man and woman, doubly as man and wife. Stop, I'll tell you what you want to know directly. Only answer me another question or two first. Have you heard anything about her health?" "Why should I hear? Dressmakers can't inquire at the doors of the nobility." "True. Now one last question. That little simpleton, Nanina?" "I have never seen or heard anything of her. She can't be at Pisa, or she would have called at our place of work." "Ah! I need not have asked about her if I had thought a moment beforehand. Father Rocco would be sure to keep her out of Fabio's sight, for his niece's sake. What? He really loved that thread paper of a girl, as you called her?" "Better than 50 such wives as he has got now. I was in the studio the morning he was told of her departure from Pisa. A letter was privately given to him, telling him that the girl had left the place out of a feeling of honor, and had hidden herself beyond the possibility of discovery to prevent him from compromising himself with all his friends by marrying her. Naturally enough, he would not believe that this was her own doing, and naturally enough also, when Father Rocco was sent for, and was not to be found, he suspected the priest of being at the bottom of the business. I never saw a man in such a fury of despair and rage before. He swore that he would have all Italy searched for the girl, and that he would be the death of the priest, and that he would never enter Luca Lomi's studio again. And as to this last particular, of course, being a man, he failed to keep his word." "Of course. At that first visit of mine to the studio, I discovered two things. The first, as I said, that Fabio was really in love with the girl. The second, that Maddalena Lomi was really in love with him. You may suppose I looked at her attentively while the disturbance was going on, and while nobody's notice was directed on me. All women are vain, I know, but vanity never blinded my eyes. I saw directly that I had but one superiority over her, my figure. She was my height, but not well made. She had hair as dark and as glossy as mine, eyes as bright and as black as mine, and the rest of her face better than mine. My nose is coarse, my lips are too thick, and my upper lip overhangs my under too far. She had none of those personal faults, and as for capacity, she managed the young fool in his passion as well as I could have managed him in her place." "How?" "She stood silent, with downcast eyes and a distressed look, all the time he was raving up and down the studio. She must have hated the girl, and been rejoiced at her disappearance, but she never showed it. You would be an awkward rival, I thought to myself, even to a handsomer woman than I. However, I determined not to despair too soon, and made up my mind to follow my plan just as if the accident of the girl's disappearance had never occurred. I smoothed down the master sculptor easily enough, flattering him about his reputation, assuring him that the works of Luca Lomi had been the objects of my adoration since childhood, telling him that I had heard of his difficulty in finding a model to complete his Minerva form, and offering myself, if he thought me worthy, for the honour, laying great stress on that word, for the honour of sitting to him. I don't know whether he was altogether deceived by what I told him, but he was sharp enough to see that I really could be of use, and he accepted my offer with a profusion of compliments. We parted, having arranged that I was to give him a first sitting in a week's time. "Why put it off so long?" "To allow our young gentleman time to cool down and return to the studio, to be sure. What was the use of my being there while he was away?" "Yes, yes, I forgot. And how long was it before he came back?" "I had allowed him more time than enough. When I had given my first sitting I saw him in the studio, and heard it was his second visit there since the day of the girl's disappearance. Those very violent men are always changeable and irresolute." "Has he made no attempt, then, to discover Nanina?" "Oh, yes. He had searched for her himself, and had set others searching for her, but to no purpose. 4 days of perpetual disappointment had been enough to bring him to his senses. Luca Lomi had written him a peace-making letter, asking what harm he or his daughter had done, even supposing Father Rocco was to blame. Maddalena Lomi had met him in the street, and had looked resignedly away from him, as if she expected him to pass her. In short, they had awakened his sense of justice, and his good nature (you see I can impartially give him his due), and they had got him back. He was silent and sentimental enough at first, and shockingly sulky and savage with the priest." "I wonder Father Rocco ventured within his reach." "Father Rocco is not a man to be daunted or defeated by anybody, I can tell you. The same day on which Fabio came back to the studio, he returned to it. Beyond boldly declaring that he thought Nanina had done quite right, and had acted like a good and virtuous girl, he would say nothing about her or her disappearance. It was quite useless to ask him questions. He denied that anyone had a right to put them. Threatening, entreating, flattering, all modes of appeal were thrown away on him. Ah, my dear, depend upon it, the cleverest and politest man in Pisa, the most dangerous to an enemy, and the most delightful to a friend, is Father Rocco. The rest of them, when I began to play my cards a little too openly, behaved with brutal rudeness to me. Father Rocco, from first to last, treated me like a lady. Sincere or not, I don't care. He treated me like a lady when the others treated me like— There, there! Don't get hot about it now. Tell me instead how you made your first approaches to the young gentleman whom you talk of so contemptuously as Fabio." "As it turned out, in the worst possible way. First, of course, I made sure of interesting him in me by telling him that I had known Nanina. So far it was all well enough. My next object was to persuade him that she could never have gone away if she had truly loved him alone, and that he must have had some fortunate rival in her own rank of life to whom she had sacrificed him, after gratifying her vanity for a time by bringing a young nobleman to her feet. I had, as you will easily imagine, difficulty enough in making him take this view of Nanina's flight. His pride and his love for the girl were both concerned in refusing to admit the truth of my suggestion. At last I succeeded. I brought him to that state of ruffled vanity and fretful self-assertion in which it is easiest to work on a man's feelings, in which a man's own wounded pride makes the best pitfall to catch him in. I brought him, I say, to that state, and then she stepped in and profited by what I had done. Is it wonderful now that I rejoice in her disappointments, that I should be glad to hear any ill thing of her that any one could tell me? But how did she first get the advantage of you? If I had found out, she would never have succeeded where I failed. All I know is that she had more opportunities of seeing him than I, and that she used them cunningly enough even to deceive me. While I thought I was gaining ground with Fabio, I was actually losing it. My first suspicions were excited by a change in Luca Lomi's conduct towards me. He grew cold, neglectful, at last absolutely rude. I was resolved not to see this, but accident soon obliged me to open my eyes. One morning I heard Fabio and Maddalena talking of me when they imagined I had left the studio. I can't repeat their words, especially here. The blood flies into my head, and the cold catches me at the heart when I only think of them. It will be enough if I tell you that he laughed at me, and that she— Hush! Not so loud. There are other people lodging in the house. Never mind about telling me what you heard. It only irritates you to no purpose. I can guess that they had discovered through her, remember, all through her. Yes, yes, I understand. They had discovered a great deal more than you ever intended them to know, and all through her. But for the priest, Virginie, I should have been openly insulted and driven from their doors. He had insisted on their behaving with decent civility toward me. They said that he was afraid of me, and laughed at the notion of his trying to make them afraid too. That was the last thing I heard. The fury I was in and the necessity of keeping it down almost suffocated me. I turned round to leave the place forever, when, who should I see, standing close behind me, but Father Rocco? He must have discovered in my face that I knew all, but he took no notice of it. He only asked, in his usual quiet, polite way, if I was looking for anything I had lost, and if he could help me. I managed to thank him, and to get to the door. He opened it for me respectfully, and bowed. He treated me like a lady to the last. It was evening when I left the studio in that way. The next morning I threw up my situation, and turned my back on Pisa. Now you know everything." "Did you hear of the marriage, or did you only assume from what you knew that it would take place?" "I heard of it about 6 months ago. A man came to sing in the chorus at our theatre who had been employed some time before at the grand concert given on the occasion of the marriage. But let us drop the subject now. I am in a fever already with talking of it. You are in a bad situation here, my dear. I declare your room is almost stifling." "Shall I open the other window?" "No. Let us go out and get a breath of air by the river side. Come, take your hood and fan. It is getting dark, nobody will see us, and we can come back here, if you like, in half an hour." Mademoiselle Virginie acceded to her friend's wish rather reluctantly. They walked toward the river. The sun was down, and the sudden night of Italy was gathering fast. Although Brigida did not say another word on the subject of Fabio or his wife, she led the way to the bank of the Arno on which the young nobleman's palace stood. Just as they got near the great door of entrance, a sedan chair, approaching in the opposite direction, was set down before it, and a footman, after a moment's conference with a lady inside the chair, advanced to the porter's lodge in the courtyard. Leaving her friend to go on, Brigida slipped in after the servant by the open wicket, and concealed herself in the shadow cast by the great closed gates. "The Marchesa Melani, to inquire how the Countess d'Ascoli and the infant are this evening," said the footman. "My mistress has not changed at all for the better since the morning," answered the porter. "The child is doing quite well." The footman went back to the sedan chair, then returned to the porter's lodge. "The Marchesa desires me to ask if fresh medical advice has been sent for," he said. "Another doctor has arrived from Florence to day," replied the porter. Mademoiselle Virginie, missing her friend suddenly, turned back toward the palace to look after her, and was rather surprised to see Brigida slip out of the wicket gate. There were 2 oil lamps burning on pillars outside the doorway, and their light glancing on the Italian's face, as she passed under them, showed that she was smiling. End of Section 39. Recording by Todd.